Hey, Hillary.
Yannick?
I recently recorded an episode about Dune, the book and movie and long-running franchise Dune, with our friend Sarah Jacoby Murphy. But she and I never did a synopsis, so if people don't know anything about Dune, are they going to be lost with our discussion? And you don't know anything about Dune, is that correct?
I don't know anything about Dune.
But you've seen the movie.
I've seen the movie. I've heard you talk about it.
Okay. So I guess
crazy words.
Yes. Well, yeah. So pretty much, yeah, that's Dune. But I wondered if maybe you, as a Dune layman, could just give a brief plot synopsis of Dune, what you know of Dune.
Just a very brief synopsis of the novel Dune.
Top of your head.
Which I haven't read.
What is Dune about? Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to say Dune is about a guy named Paul.
Paul Atreides, yes.
He's like a prince of like a royal family of some kind.
Son of a very powerful Duke Leto Atreides.
And they're on one planet, and then the Emperor
yes.
gives them like the responsibility for this other planet, which is a deserty planet,
yes.
but it has the spice that everybody likes.
You're doing really well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so they go there, but then it turns out that it was like a trap for the family.
Right. The Atreides family, like the Atreides dynasty, is sort of deemed to be too powerful. So they're like, we'll give you this garbage planet that makes spice. But it's kind of a setup.
Yeah. So then they go there
yes.
and they're like, this is all sabotaged, but
right.
we're going to make the best of it. And
right.
they try to make friends with the locals who are...
The Fremen.
Yes. Who are like desert people.
And have adapted to living in Dune, in this sandy world.
And they have blue eyes.
Because of the spice.
They have fancy blue eyes.
Because of the spice.
And
the melange,
because of the spice.
It's called.
Which is in the dirt?
Yes.
Okay.
They have to mine it and refine it from the dirt.
Okay.
But it's how they use their technology. It's a really crucial part, not just to the planet of Dune, but to the universe.
So it's like a big economic
yes.
thing.
Yes.
Is it an analogy for oil?
I suppose it could be. It's treated a little bit like LSD at times, but yes, it could be. It could be an oil thing.
Psychotropic oil.
The book actually has a lot more Islamic overtones than the movie, so that would actually kind of make sense.
Anyway, so then they go to this planet.
Yes.
Then the family that was at that planet before comes back
right.
and like kills everybody.
The Harkonnens.
The Harkonnens.
Yes. They're pretty much just evil.
They're just bad.
Yes.
They come back, they kill everybody so they can take the planet back, but Paul, no?
Well, yes. I mean, but they only care about the spice. They don't care at all about the planet.
They just want the spice.
And Duke Leto Atreides is actually like a good man and a good leader and wanted to
Paul's
work with the
dad.
Fremen. Paul's dad.
Paul's
Leto.
dad. So, yeah, that's the plan. But then ultimately, Paul, the prince guy,
yes.
and his mother are like stranded on this planet, which is Dune. Which is Dune?
Which is Dune, yes.
Doesn't it have another name?
Oh, they call it Dune.
They call it Dune?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Paul and his mother...
Jessica. And Jessica is a Bene Gesserit, which is like which is like sort of a mystical, quasi-religious sect.
It's like
of
a
people.
sisterhood,
yes,
kind of a situation.
Yes,
and so she's been teaching him like weird magical ways.
Yes, and the thought
they
is
get
that,
there,
yes, okay,
and it turns out that everybody thinks he's some sort of messiah,
right?
Who's gonna like
the
bring
Kwisatz Haderach,
that thing,
yes,
and he's gonna save everybody,
right?
And is that it?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good foundation.
Okay,
that's where we're at. Yeah.
Dune.
All right. Well, thanks for your help.
You're welcome.
Now
I hope that it was useful.
I think it was. I feel enlightened. Let's roll into our episode with Sarah Jacoby Murphy. Thanks for tuning into Howe's Things, a podcast and radio show from the David A. Howe Public Library, recorded right here in Wellsville, New York. I'm Nick Gunning, and today I'm joined by my old friend Sarah Jacoby Murphy. Sarah, welcome.
Thanks, Nick. It's good to be here with all of you.
This Dune conversation between the two of us has been years coming at this point?
At least 1 year, maybe closer to 18 months.
Okay.
I think I read it last spring. Spring of 2020, pandemic time.
I appreciate your knack for details, something that will become very helpful when reading the book Dune. by Frank Herbert. All right, so Sarah and I are going to be talking about Dune a little bit later. We've both read the book. We also just recently watched the new movie, so we're going to dive into all of that. And I know, Sarah, you've gone a little bit ahead of me and read other Dune books. So We'll get there. All in good time. All in good time.
Okay.
But let's begin by opening up our books and see where our bookmarks are. Gosh, Sarah, what about you? You know, usually when you and I talk about books, you've read a whole slew of like really dense, quasi-depressing kind of things, and I'm wondering if this streak is going to continue here today.
Oh man, I'm glad you asked, Nick. I don't know. So what I'm currently reading is
Yeah.
the very long French novel by Marcel Proust, In
Oh,
Remembrance of the Past.
okay.
Yeah. Which I had for a very long time. I kept it on my bookshelf to show people how smart I was
Yes.
without ever reading it. And I finally made the dive, and it's very good, but man, it's slow.
Yeah.
I checked all the boxes. Depressing, long, meandering.
Good. Good. My wife has read Swan's Way. That's Proust, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I haven't. So long and meandering, and you're right in the middle of it.
I mean, if I'm like 150 pages in, which is
Okay.
maybe like 15% of the way in.
Wow.
I
Okay.
think if you read all of them together.
Okay.
So, but yeah, that's really my only thing that I'm reading right now, though. I'm stuck in a couple of books that I just can't get past the halfway point. What about you?
Yeah, I'm in a similar situation because I started David Copperfield by Charles Dickens pre-pandemic, and I don't know, I just haven't had the fortitude to sit down and like power through it. Though I think I am about halfway through. That's a pretty monstrous book, and I am enjoying it. But that's always like my back burner book, you know, like I'll pick that up in between and pound through a couple chapters. It was very segmented, that book. So I always kind of have that brewing in the background.
Yeah, that's how the Proust book has been for me for a while too, where I'm like, I'll read 10 pages and then call it a day.
Yep. As long as the bookmark keeps slowly moving, you know, you can see that progress being made. I recently read a book called Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. Are you familiar with this book?
You know, I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah.
I have never.
It won all sorts of awards when it came out. And it's one we're doing for the library book club, but it's one I've been wanting to read for a while. And so the topic is really, it's race relations, but it's not like a dark and dour kind of look at it. It's a much more like, I don't know, it's a very approachable kind of read, and it's all sort of like, look, there's a lot of people with good intentions who are still kind of racist, you know? And so I really liked it. It was one that I was listening to it primarily on audiobook, and it was the kind where I'd get home and I'd sit in the car to like get to the next chapter because like I just, you know, I had to know what it was. So I went through that one pretty quickly, and I'm excited to talk about it in the book club.
Yeah, definitely. So I heard someone say recently about that book, they were trying to predict classics. They had that on their list. So I'm curious, what do you think about that?
Really?
Do you think it will be a classic?
Huh. You know, I mean, I think it's certainly like relevant and appropriate for this morning. I said it wasn't like dark and dour because I feel like a lot of the books that are being written on that topic right now tend to go down that way. So I think this one is really distinctive, and it is much more like a approachable kind of read. I wouldn't have put that on my predictions for a future classic. Partly because I feel like it's really tied to this moment in time. Like there's an inciting incident in the beginning where Amira, who's the babysitter, has to take the daughter for an emergency thing, and so it's she and the daughter in a grocery store at like 11 o'clock at night, and the security guard just automatically assumes that she's kidnapped this poor helpless white child. And that's where everything kind of like comes from, that like that event. And I would hope that event is something that is not going to be something that we're talking about in 50
that
years.
Feels irrelevant.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So I don't know. Interesting, and definitely worth a read. I don't know if I'd put it on my future classics list, but I definitely enjoyed it.
Yeah.
On the lighter side, I read Wonder Woman Earth 1 Volume 3. So you're not a comic book gal, are you? You don't.
No,
it's not your
I
jam.
feel
Okay.
saying it,
No, that's fine. So this is DC Comics has this line of books that are all called Earth 1, and it's basically just an avenue where they tell standalone stories that aren't connected to, you know, the Wonder Woman comics that have come before or other comics that are concurrently happening. Because if you try to read modern comics, it's like, oh, you're reading Wonder Woman, but you got to go read this issue of Justice League, otherwise you won't know what happens next. It's that whole thing. The Earth 1 line has Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Teen Titans, and it's all just sort of like, this is a complete story. So they're pretty good for someone like you who is not a comic book fan, because you don't really have to go into them with any knowledge, and when it ends, it ends. So you're not like, what next?
That definitely sounds like a classic, though.
The Wonder Woman for future class. Yeah. Yep.
They're going to be reading that one.
You got me. You got me. They will be teaching this. You'll learn about this in elementary school.
I mean, I would be up for it. Lend it to me, Nick. I will read it.
All right.
I don't think I have ever read a single comic book,
Really?
but I have enjoyed graphic novels, which in my mind are different. I don't know if they are actually categorically different. But yeah, no, I'd be totally game.
I think when you're talking about comic books, you are talking about more like long format. You know, this is an issue of an ongoing series. These Earth 1 titles, I would probably classify more in the graphic novel section because they're not traditional issues. And like I said, they're a contained start and finish. But 3 volumes of this, and they've come out, it's like every other year. So I feel like I read the first volume, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago at this point, and I really liked that. Like, the first volume is one of my favorite Wonder Woman comics that I've read. And 2 and 3 were okay, and 3 does make a good conclusion, but I still feel like it would have been a stronger story if it was just volume 1, you know? What I'm currently reading is very applicable to our conversation today, so I won't get into it until later, but I'm reading Paul of Dune by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson.
That's the pre-Dune story, correct? Or no?
Well, it's a little bit of both. It is like if you were going to read them like chronologically, I think you would read Paul of Dune directly after Dune, because it's kind of in that space between Dune and Dune Messiah, but it has large sections that are flashbacks to Paul and Leto when Paul is younger. It's a little bit of both, but I am enjoying it, so... But we'll save it. We can't jump ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, let's not get in. Let's not calm down.
That's a strict format. All right, let's take a look at some book news.
Look into the future to see what it proves. It's time for book news.
All right, this is the hardcover fiction list. Sarah, what's your preference in reading? Do you like a hardcover? Do you like a paperback? Do you like digital?
So I used to always like paperbacks, and then I married book snob who really thinks hardcovers are better quality, designed to be long lasting. So I could go either way now. I'm used to both. I do not prefer digital. That's difficult for me. I like to hold it in my hand, flip the pages, smell it, all of the tactile and sensory things.
No, I agree. I don't. I've come around a lot on digital. I read a lot more ebooks than I used to. Paul of Dune actually is an ebook that I'm reading. But yeah, I don't really have a preference. My wife is like strictly paperback only. So, you know, it's just kind of interesting, the quirks that people have.
I do think the hand feel of a paperback, you just can't, the Foley pages, you really, you know, a hardcover can never match that feeling.
And like if you're like sitting in a chair and you've got like a mug of coffee and you're holding a book, it's a lot easier to hold a paperback. Or if you're in bed and you're like laying back, a paperback you can hold one-handed. Hardcover's a real commitment. So
exactly. Yeah. It's the people's cover.
Yes. I've never heard it put that way, but yes, you're absolutely right. All right. Here's the New York Times bestseller list, and these are all hardcover. So tell your wife these are hardcover so she can just...
I'll let her know.
Okay, thank
Stay
you.
Away. Or she'll... That's a good thing for her.
Yeah. Great. Number 10, with 2 weeks on the list, is Silverview by John Le Carre. A London spy chief's investigation brings him to a quiet seaside town where Julian Lawnsley has relocated and opened a bookstore. Do you like spy stories, Sarah?
I do, yeah. I mean, really anything British and mysterious, I would probably...
You'd probably be down with John Le Carre then.
It's on my list.
Yeah? Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is probably the one people know mostly of his. And... there was a movie with Gary Oldman, which I really liked, and I'd wanted to read the book, but here's a little inside tip, Sarah. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is not the first book in that series, so you don't want to start there.
Confusing.
It is confusing.
Sure.
I don't know why that one just like popped, but that's the one that everybody knows. But it's like book 4 that follows Smiley is the guy's name, the spy in that. So it's not the beginning, and it's the one people gravitate towards, and so it can be a little like, what is happening? So ask your friendly librarian what the first book in that series is. The next one on the list here, number 9, has been on here for 25 weeks. The Reese Witherspoon Book Club, Sarah, is not kidding around. I don't know who decided that Reese Witherspoon is like the queen of popular literature, but if you put that Reese Witherspoon sticker on it, people are going to check it out.
But so I have a question about this because, I mean, has she superseded Oprah, or is Oprah still really the queen of the book clubs? I
feel like Oprah's kind of slowed down. I don't know if it's an annual thing anymore. It doesn't get a ton of coverage, and I rarely see Oprah book club stickers on things. Have you ever read Jonathan Franzen? Here's a rabbit hole for you. Have you ever read Jonathan Franzen?
I haven't, but I have 2 of his books on my bookshelf.
What do you have?
Which is sort of the same thing.
Okay,
right?
yeah, I guess it is. Which ones do you have?
Oh goodness, I have The Corrections.
Yeah, that's the famous one.
Yeah, and then there's one more that I have. If you said the name, I would know it. But...
Well, the one that I love best is Freedom. And you have Freedom. Okay.
But it's hardcover, unfortunately. So I'll probably
got it. I really like Freedom. And I also liked Purity. He's got a new one out called Crossroads, which is actually on this list. It's just not in the top 10, number 13, Crossroads. But I bring this up because there was a whole kerfuffle back in the day when Oprah decided that The Corrections was going to be the Oprah's book club pick. And Franzen was like, no, I don't. Please don't put the Oprah sticker on my book. Please don't do that. And they did it because the publishers, want to make cash.
Yeah.
And it was a whole thing with Jonathan Franzen and the Oprah book club. So I don't know.
I'll look it up. That sounds like
it does sound fun, doesn't it?
That's worth a Google.
I think it's worth your time. Definitely. Okay, so, but all that comes back to the Reese Witherspoon book club. And that's because this book, number 9, The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave, has been on here for 25 weeks. Hannah Hall discovers truth about her missing husband and bonds with his daughter from a previous relationship.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Sounds dramatic.
It does sound dramatic, yeah. It's got a very beach read kind of cover, so I don't know if that's really what it's about, but that's what it's got. Number 8 on the list, Oh, William by Elizabeth Strout. Have you read Elizabeth Strout? Like Olive Kittredge or Burgess Boys?
I have not. Again, I have her books.
I gotta stop asking you these questions. I'm only asking you the ones that seem like you would have.
Always, I have it on my shelf.
You have it on your shelf. Okay. Lucy Barton. Oh, so this is a recurring character in Elizabeth Strout books. Lucy Barton joins her ex-husband on a trip to look into family secrets. That's not unlike the one we just talked about.
That is true, yeah. Although the husband's still alive.
He's alive.
It's key different. Well, to begin with.
To begin with, true. You've given me a lot to think about today, Sarah. Number 7 was 6 weeks on the list, Apples Never Fall, which sounds like a latter-day Dr. Seuss book, but it is in fact by Leanne Moriarty. I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask if you've read Leanne Moriarty, but the one people talk about the most is Big Little Lies, and that was made into that Nicole Kidman show. 9 Perfect Strangers, also by Leanne Moriarty, also made into a Nicole Kidman show.
Interesting.
Yeah, do with that what you will. In Apples Never Fall, the Delaney siblings suspect their father of causing the disappearance of their mother.
A lot of these books are about disappearances.
True.
Like secrets, family.
Yeah. Well,
drama.
This next one's really going to cheer you up. Number 6, new this week. So this is new. Dear Santa by Debbie McCumber. A special letter to Santa. You like that one?
That's a paperback. There's no way that's a hardback, Nick.
Well, actually, these come out in small hardback versions. Probably so you can get the coin. But you're right. It does feel like you'd pick this up in an airport. A special letter to Santa brings about hope, love, and second chances for Lindy Carmichael. This is not an interesting story, Sarah, but I met Debbie McCumber at an ALA conference a few years ago, and I chatted with her about her book. I don't remember what it's called. An Alaskan Christmas, something like that. It was about going to Alaska for Christmas. And so I chatted with Debbie McCumber about that book, and then she signed an audiobook copy of her book, The Cottages, which I have not read.
Is she a Christmas writer? Is this
No.
her deal?
No, I would say no. More like light romance. And not always romance. Sometimes it's just like Becky's used bookshop wasn't going to get the customers she needed, so she had to look onto other options. Luckily, she could bake by Debbie McCumber. That sort of thing. Often there is romance mixed in, though. So if that's your bag, Dear Santa by Debbie McCumber.
All right.
Number 5, 4 weeks on the list, Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Dewar.
That's not a name.
It is a name. He wrote All the Light We Cannot See.
Yeah, I was going to say, that title just doesn't really grab me the way that I want it to for a book by him.
Cloud Cuckoo Land. So you read All the Light We Cannot See?
No, it's on my shelf.
Oh my gosh. I wasn't going to bring it up, but you said you had expectations about his writing, so I assumed you read it.
All the Light You Cannot See, that just has such a nice
title.
ring to it. But
it's
Cloud
a good title.
Cuckoo Land sounds... Yeah, anyway, tell me about it.
I don't know. An interconnected cast of dreamers and outsiders are in a dangerous and disparate setting past, present, and future.
That doesn't tell me anything. I don't think that qualifies as a plot summary.
Here's an odd one for you. State of Terror by Hillary Rodham Clinton. Do you remember Hillary Rodham Clinton?
I have a vague memory of her.
Do you? You know what? I didn't even think of this until this moment. But at the conference where I met Debbie McCumber in person, Hillary Clinton was the keynote speaker, and I went to her talk. We didn't meet, but I feel our eyes connected,
Yeah. So have you met every author on this list, or?
No, just Debbie McCumber so far, but I was in the same room with Hillary Clinton. I mean, that's got to count for something.
Same thing. Yeah.
It's the same thing? Okay.
I think so.
Anyway, this is by Hillary Rodham Clinton and Louise Penny. Louise Penny, super popular author in Wellsville. She writes the Inspector Gamache mystery series, but here she's writing a political thriller with Hillary Clinton. I read the first couple pages of this, and it was rough.
Really? So, okay, well, I don't know how far down this rabbit hole we want to go, but do you think that's a good career move for Hillary? Like writing these penny thriller novels?
I guess she's probably at a point in her life where she can just do whatever she wants, except be president, apparently. But any other thing, I think she could do. And so, she
Maybe
loves...
she's just testing that theory. She's like, I can do anything.
Maybe. I know that she loves Louise Penny. That's come up in interviews and things before. So, probably just a fun opportunity.
This could be a dream. I mean, good for her.
Yeah.
Seizing her life, doing what she can with it. Writing a novel. I hope she did write some of it too.
I'm sure she did. She's written several memoirs and things. Bill Clinton. Do you remember Bill Clinton?
Yeah. Again,
I
don't know.
William Jefferson Clinton. Okay. He's been co-writing books with James Patterson, and they are about like a super sexy president.
I love that. Do you think they just sit at home together, sort of talking about future collaborations?
Maybe.
What a life.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you got nothing but time and money. Why not write a schlocky book with James Patterson? I started listening.
I wonder if there are like a lot of state secrets that are sort of interwoven into these books from his time as.
Do you know what? I don't know why. Sarah, you're just making me go off on all these rabbit holes. But when the first book, I think it's called The President's is Missing. This is the President's Daughter is Missing. I don't know. The Bill Clinton, James Patterson situation.
Yeah.
When that book first came out, they were doing a press tour about it. And with, everything going on at the moment, everybody just wanted to ask Bill Clinton questions about Monica Lewinsky. They wanted to ask, like, the power that you had, like, isn't that... And so go and find this. I'm sure there's a compilation, but there's so many times where you have Bill Clinton talking about Monica Lewinsky while James Patterson is sitting next to him, just, like, praying for the sweet release of death. So...
Wait, so when was their first collaboration?
A couple years ago, like 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
But there's already a second one out. But yeah, I mean, it was just that was
like the resurgence of the Monica.
Yes, yeah, and just the whole like power dynamic situation was big. So
that's wonderful.
Also not really relevant, but up until that point, Jimmy Carter was the only former president who wrote fiction. It was a novel called The Hornet's Nest, which no one has ever read.
It's actually on my shelf.
Is it? I believe it. If not, I'm going to get it for you for Christmas. But I should tell you about State of Terror, number 4 on the list here by Hillary Rodham Clinton. Do you remember her? Mm-hmm. And Louise Penny. In the wake of the previous administration's mishandling of international affairs, oh boy, boy, oh boy, woo! The new Secretary of State, Ellen Adams, confronts interconnected global threats. I wonder where she gets her inspiration. Hard to know.
She really did not reach far.
Hard to know.
She?
Hard to know.
Is there like a private server in this novel?
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
I'd read this just to know.
I would like you to read it and report back. Absolutely.
Well, you can look at my Goodreads, see what I thought of it.
Okay, well. Number 3, 4 weeks on the list. The Wish by Nicholas Sparks. Maggie Dawes, a renowned travel photographer, struggles with a medical diagnosis over Christmas. I mean, God bless him, but Nicholas Sparks has a format, Like, if someone's not dead, they're dying.
Yeah.
And there are going to be mourners after the fact. I haven't read a ton of Nicholas Sparks. In fact, the only book I ever read by Nicholas Sparks was Knights and Rodanthe. But after reading all of the synopses, I feel like I get it.
Yeah, I think so too. He's someone who I can I read him quickly.
You do?
Definitely a skim.
Son of
but
a, I could have asked.
Not regularly. I just, if there's an occasion, if I'm on a plane or on a train or, in a doctor's office, whatever, that type of setting.
Right.
And there's, the formula is very satisfying.
Do you typically travel to your doctor's appointments by train and plane?
Not always, but when I can.
When you can, sure. For the sights.
But you know what I mean? Just like something, like a book you just pick up.
I do. Heck, I still read some James Patterson. His Alex Cross series I still like, so I'm not above any of this. Yeah. I'm not above it at all. I don't know
what it ticks psychologically, but something about the familiar.
I mean, it's cozy. It's comfort food. It's the same reason why I like Murder, She Wrote and Star Trek novels. I know what I'm going to get and I like it. So that's what I said. God bless him. Tell me your favorite Nicholas Sparks book.
I don't know that I have a favorite.
Okay.
I mean, they all blend together.
Sure. Okay.
There are pros and cons to the formula, right?
Okay.
Yeah, they all blend together. I mean, I don't know. Well, did I like the fire one? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Safe Haven.
Yeah.
There was like a marriage one. Well, they're all marriage.
They're all marriage ones. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a pointless conversation. I can't.
Safe Haven. I'm gonna lock you in with Safe Haven.
Great.
Number 2, with 3 weeks on the list, The Lincoln Highway by Immortals. Two friends who escaped from a juvenile work farm take Emmett Watson on an unexpected journey to New York City in 1954. This is the same author who wrote Gentleman in Moscow, which was huge. I couldn't really get into it. I didn't really like it. But it was huge. So I'm sure this is eagerly awaited.
I won't tell anybody.
Number 1, new this week, The Judge's List by Mr. John Grisham. The second book in the Whistler series. Oh, that's hard to hear. That's hard to hear. I hated The Whistler. That was one of my least favorite John Grisham books ever. Anyway, Inspector Lacey Stoltz goes after a serial killer and closes in on a sitting judge.
Ooh.
Yeah. This one is notable in Grisham's back catalog because he doesn't usually do... there are murders in Grisham books quite often, but this is like a serial killer, and that's a very different vibe for him. I like John Grisham.
Is the serial killer the Whistler?
He could be. That would be a dead giveaway. If you hear whistling, I'm
just curious who the Whistler is, but
the Whistler,
maybe I'll have to read.
I believe it was about a whistleblower, as I recall. I don't know. I didn't like it. It didn't stick in my head.
I like the idea of a serial killer who's just whistling as he does evil deeds.
It's very comic booky. Creepy, it's very comic booky. So maybe you'd get into it. Well, that's the hardcover fiction list for November 7th, 2021. Any on there, Sarah? Any on there make it to your to read list or your buy and put on a shelf and never read list?
I mean, they could probably theoretically all be on my buy and never read list.
Even Dear Santa?
Knowing me. I mean, for 50 cents.
Yeah.
In the right situation at a library sale, sure.
Why not?
I mean, the one where the kids escape from juvie and go to New York. Yeah, that sounds...
Lincoln Highway. Yeah. Okay. Well, if you do, report back. All right. Shall we talk sandworms?
Yes. I would love to talk sandworms.
Frank Herbert, here we come. So I'm trying to remember, Sarah, as I look back over our history together. I don't know why we started talking about Dune. We were at a bonfire at my house, and why was it I want to read Dune? Why did that happen?
Yeah, I'll tell you why. Well, so it begins with my local library.
Okay.
Wait, do you want the long version of the story or the short version?
Hit whatever you got.
Well, it's like a difference of 15 seconds, so I'll give you the...
Okay, well, you just wasted 15 seconds in asking, so...
So the beginning of 2020, before the world ended.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Well, actually, even before that, I have a very hard time listening to audiobooks, but I have a long commute. So I'm always in this constant search for something that can hold my attention while I'm in the car. And I wasn't able to find anything. Anyway, I came across Ready Player One on my
right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, local library.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I was so immersed. I thought it was great. gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, all the things. So I thought maybe sci-fi is what I need to do, like sci-fi books and audio. Then I was searching through my Libby app, and Dune popped up. I had absolutely no context or knowledge of what role this book has played in American culture.
Right, yeah.
But I started listening to it, really hated the audiobook, but thought the world was interesting.
Okay.
And then I was at a bonfire at your house, and you were like, well, I have a physical copy. Would you like to borrow it? And then I borrowed it for over a year.
Yeah.
You keep it at my house.
You got custody of it.
Yep. And so I finished it in the physical form, and it was great.
Yeah. So that same collection that you borrowed from me, like 20 years ago in college, I was at a little antique store in Arcade, New York. And so it wasn't quite 20 years ago. And I found this little Dune trilogy. It was like the first 3 books, and like I knew what Dune was, and I mean I liked sci-fi. And so I picked it up and was like, yeah, this is like a classic. I'm going to read these books. And I don't know, in college I just couldn't do it. I don't know. I just was like, my head was so full of cuz it's hard, it's a hard book to read. You know what I mean? It kind of feels like a textbook until you kind of get a shorthand with it, which doesn't really happen until you finish the book and look back on it. But you
have to have a high tolerance for very obscure facts.
You sure do. So I read probably 50 pages and was like, I'll come back to this. And then my bookmark was still in there in the year 2020 when
it sure was.
When you borrowed it. But then I was like, well, if she's going to read my copy, then gosh darn it, I'm going to read my copy too. But I went on a similar journey because I started with that audiobook and it was just so bad that I switched to the physical copy. And I did eventually, I don't know, it's like in retrospect, I appreciate it more than I ever enjoyed it while I was reading it. Reading that book to me was like when you get a sliver and a piece of it stays under your skin and then your skin just slowly forces it out over time. That's what I feel like the reading process of this book is. The book just slowly tries to propel you away from it. But
So, would you recommend people?
Well, that's the thing. Like, if you can do it, you know, if you could just kind of like get over the hump and just accept that you're just not going to understand things like for a while, and then you're going to have to like retroactively apply knowledge to figure out what you just read. Like, if you got the patience for that, then I do think it's ultimately worth it. That's kind of a backhanded compliment, but I think that's true. I feel like most people would agree with that. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's true as well. And even when you understand what's happening, all of the, people's internal monologues, there's so much that's still almost incomprehensible.
It is.
But even when you know what's going on in terms of the plot, there are whole like pages where Paul's thinking about theoretical future scenarios and like it doesn't really make sense. Like if you stop to try and really understand it, it's not worth it.
It's
also
not worth your time. It's not a super convenient book to pick up and put down either.
Although you did.
I did. Yeah. It took me 18 years, but I finally did it. But that's part of it because you really have to commit to it. You know, you got to sit down and like knock out 30 pages or something to really like let it sit in. Here's some fun facts about the book Dune. It was originally published in serial format in Analog Magazine, which I can't even imagine, you know?
Yeah, how would you, like, where would you break? I guess any chapter break could theoretically, if you're not committed to people being hooked in by understanding what's going on, if that's not your hook, then sure. Yeah,
why not?
It could be a serial. Yeah.
Why not? It won the Hugo Award, and it won the very first Nebula Award. Herbert himself produced 5 sequels, and then his son Brian Herbert and sci-fi author Kevin J. Anderson produced lots more. There's a lot of them now. And these are anything from sequels to prequels to midquels, like Paul of Dune that I'm reading right now. They're all over the place. A lot of them are based on detailed notes left by Frank Herbert. So Brian Herbert found in his dad's papers a huge cache of notes that were like Dune 7. So the 2 that kind of conclude the initial 6 books are really supposed to be based on that. Who knows how true that is, but they're continuing to go and they're continuing to sell. Sarah, you're a space nerd, right?
Sure.
You don't like space? I thought you were like NASA and all that kind of stuff.
No, I do like space, but nerd, that's putting a certain pressure on me that I don't like.
So. I see. Okay. All right, but you have an interest in our space. Okay. Well, well, you really took the wind out of the sails about this fun fact. But features on Saturn's moon Titan are named after places in Dune. So
that's a good space fact.
Yeah, it is. So Titan has like these dark plains, and they're named after, like, there's Arrakis Planitia, Chusak Planitia, and a bunch of others. They took all the names for Titan things from Dune. So
that's great.
So if you wanted to start an online bookstore that would eventually turn into like a space romp, you could maybe go to Arrakis yourself. If you wanted to.
I'll put that on my bucket list.
if you wanted to.
Trip to Saturn.
So you right away you read Dune Messiah pretty quick after this, right? So you weren't daunted, I guess, by Dune.
No, well, so I read it a year later.
A year later, okay.
Yeah,
you had my books a long time.
Time frame of reading Dune, that's very quick. For everyone else, it's a long time.
I'll finish that at my retirement.
So I read Dune Messiah about a year later, and I would actually say, so reading Dune Messiah, where Dune ends, it doesn't actually feel like the end of the story.
Oh no!
Reading Dune Messiah felt like a complete unit.
Okay.
Like part 1 was Dune, part 2 was Dune Messiah. Obviously, Herbert went on to write more, but that really felt like it should have been the first book, because when Dune ends, it just kind of ends.
It does.
It's so anticlimactic.
It's a little confusing. Like, I hit that last page because there's all sorts of appendices and glossaries and stuff in the back of the book. So I didn't actually realize I was that close to finishing it. And so I read the last section and I turn the page and I'm like, what? Because it's not it's not a tidy finish at all. It's just like, and I shall stop writing now.
Exactly. They're all just standing around staring at each other. And,
The end.
It's not quite what you want. But it was still enough to keep me going. I mean, I think the strength of Dune is the world, and its complexities. Like, there are pros and cons to how detailed everything is, but it's interesting. I mean, if you're able to get into it, there's so much to think about and explore.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, I would, like, so my wife read a little bit of this aloud to me when I was like doing other things, and she'd be like, so wait, what is happening? And then I would like explain to her what had happened in the book before then. And in the process of explaining it, I'd sort of be like, man, this is really multifaceted. Like, the more you think about it, there's so much with each individual character. I feel like there's nobody in here who's only working one angle. Everybody's got so many different things going on. It's just this patchwork of motivations and, and goals and things that all these characters are trying to meet. So, like, it's kind of hard to follow any one storyline because they're so interconnected, and there's religious elements, there's just relational elements, there's political elements, of course. And so, I mean, there's so much of it going on. That's something that I really do appreciate, because a lot of times in sci-fi, I feel like, especially classic sci-fi, and like, don't at me, but like in my experience, I feel like they don't do a ton with character development. And I feel like you can't really knock Dune for not developing the characters, Yeah,
I think that's true. Well, and I think something else that I appreciated about it is in line with the complexity and what you're saying about everyone having kind of multiple motivations and things happening. But just that how much he talks about ecology, not just in terms of the planet, like the ecology of the environment of Dune, but this idea that one small change impacts everything else, which is an idea he takes out of ecology. And they talk about it in relationship to this goal of Dune becoming some sort of lush world. Yeah. That, like in the appendix about the ecology of Dune, they talk about how, like, if you introduce one species, that can have all sorts of unintended consequences. And they talk a lot about that. But it's interesting because in the book, that's true of the political ecosystem. That's true when Paul is looking at his timelines and all of these, like, futures and possible things where it's like everything impacts everything else in these like minute ways.
It's true. It's funny because on the one hand, it is a very dense book. Like, it's a dense read. And one of the things, like, I don't read a ton of fantasy, and I've complained about this many times on the podcast, so sorry everybody, but one of the things that drives me a little crazy about fantasy sometimes is that there's so much explanation about the world. And Dune, I think, really drives home like why that's necessary, because so much of this book, they just throw out a term and that's it. They just move on. Yeah. So you better hope that you're already from like Caladan or something, and you just know and that was a frustrating thing when I first tried to read it, because I was constantly going back to the glossary to try to be like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. Which, the glossary, not
it's
that...
not really, no.
Yeah.
It's not
like,
that
it's
helpful.
there,
yeah,
and it can provide a couple of, like, helpful terms, but
right.
I would flip back there often and not find anything at all.
True.
What I need.
Well, it's almost like if you have a general idea of what they're talking about, the glossary might confirm that you were right. But if you have no idea, you'll be like, oh, okay. So now you've defined that term with other nonsensical words. Thanks so much.
helpful,
yeah. So I picked up Paula Dune because I knew that you were reading, or had read, Messiah. And for a long time, I'd kind of toyed with the idea of picking up one of the prequels that were written by a more, with a more modern sensibilities in mind. And Kevin J. Anderson, I've read a lot of his stuff, mostly Star Wars, like the Jedi Academy trilogy or that kind of thing. So I'm familiar with his writing, and I like it typically. And so for a long time, I was like, I should just read one of those prequels, and then that'll give me kind of like a basis for what the world is like. And then, maybe Dune will be a little bit more like palatable for me. I'll be able to understand a little more clearly. And well, I guess I'm glad I didn't do that. Reading Paul of Dune was actually really helpful to kind of contextualize what happened in Dune, because it's moments after. And so as they're kind of discussing what has happened, it allowed me to kind of make connections that I was kind of like, oh, okay. Or like, yes, that's what I thought, Yeah. Because it's, I mean, I haven't finished it, and so I can't say like how good it is ultimately. I do feel like it captures the world well, but the style is very different. So
I was just going to ask about that.
It'd be kind of jarring.
I was just going to ask if you can tell that they're written by different authors.
You can. I mean, they do a lot they follow the same format. So like, there's not like chapter 1, chapter 2. It's always like a quote from some, work of fiction, or work of nonfiction from within the Dune world. But it is just a much more modern take on it. I don't know how to explain it. It's just when you sit down and read it, it flows a lot more naturally, and I think is more focused on
the reader experience.
Yes. It's trying to make sure that you understand what we're talking about and where we are in the grand scheme of things and all that, which is not something that Dune bothers with. So
no. Which is something that I missed. I mean, because I think what I've pieced together of the backstory, like I think it's so interesting that this takes place in our universe.
Right, yeah.
But 10,000 years or 20,000 years later, it's just interesting to think about what humans will be like.
Right.
And even that they're, I love this idea that they had this, I forget what they call it, but when they destroyed all artificial intelligence,
right,
that there was this kind of great climactic war between humanity and the machine, and they no longer have computers, but they've instead focused on developing the human mind,
right,
to have these computational powers that it might need, or even the psychological powers, like in the case of the Bene Gesserit order and things like that. And I think that's so interesting to think about how humanity will evolve over the course of thousands of years.
Yeah.
But they don't really talk about that background, and I'm like, I want to read that book.
Yeah. Well, the connections to like our time and like Earth are actually played up a little bit more in Paul of Dune. So I don't know if that's true of the other like Anderson and Brian Herbert books, but that's there. But you bring up an interesting point, and that is that like there's not a lot of like science in this science fiction. You know what I mean? They have equipment, like they have their suits that, repurpose moisture and all that stuff. But there's never like here's how they work. It's just like, put this suit on and drink your own urine, get out there, and that's it. Like you don't get, it's very like soft sci-fi,
Yeah. Well, and even that the way that they navigate through space is because, the Space Guild, which is a navigational group of people, essentially have some sort of like psychological ability to see far enough into the future to navigate.
Right.
So it's not with a computer. It's just hard to imagine how that actually functions in practice, that you'd be able to navigate through space because you can see into the future short term. Like, why would that actually be helpful? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. Some of the technology aspects of it, or lack of technology, is a little bit jarring.
It is, but I mean, like when you're reading it, I wasn't constantly like, well, explain to me how that works. But when you really think about, like what makes this sci-fi versus fantasy, and I think I think because of the connect, like because it's set in like our world in the future, that is really the thing that kind of pushes it over the edge into be sci-fi versus fantasy. I think if it was just a completely made up world, given the kind of world building they do and the setup that they have, it, to me, the mystical elements and all that make it play a little bit more like fantasy. So it really walks a fine line there.
It's interesting with the mystical elements because a lot of times they try and root that in some sort of like chemical process,
right? Or like selective breeding or whatever.
Selective breeding, exactly, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
But in the end, something like the ability to tell the future, I guess there's an understanding of physics that could accommodate that as a sort of scientific possibility. Well, but it does feel much more like fantasy or magic than it does sci-fi or science.
I think the whole thing with like these mind expanding drugs makes total sense to me when you think about, we're talking like 1965, when like the Beatles are doing LSD to make Sgt. Pepper and that sort of thing. I mean, like this was the moment of like the conversation being all about like, what are the limits of humans' minds? Like, how do you tap into all of that? And I think you kind of see that like 60s experimentation vibe happening in here, which I'm sure was intentional. I mean, I'm sure that was part of the driving force of making the spice be such a sought after thing.
Yeah. It's also, did you have a moment, I had a moment reading it where you just realize that the spice is just a drug.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's that's what it does, and everybody needs it. And it's how the entire universe functions. And you're like, oh, everyone's just addicted to spice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And they sort of, I don't know if excuse it is the right word, but it's like how they're able to do the things that they're able to do. So it's like there's an argument for it being necessary because they've set up a society that's based on everybody being on this drug.
Yeah.
So taking it away would be catastrophic because they wouldn't be able to do the things that they have come to rely on it to do.
Yeah.
So again, just a lot of really, I love all the political stuff with the Atreides line kind of essentially being banished to Dune. Like here, you can go have this piece of garbage dirt world, to sort of get away from them. And one thing, this kind of transitions into talking about the movie, but one thing that I really liked in the book that I would have liked a little bit more of in the movie was that Leto, who's the Duke in the beginning, Paul's father, knows that it's a trap. Like he knows I'm being set up. This is, he knows exactly what's happening, and he just thinks he can handle it. Like he thinks that he thinks that he can power through it and like use it to his advantage. And that's kind of, I mean, without giving spoilers, that's the thing that really is problematic for him, because I don't know if he has too much confidence or it's just kind of a hopeless situation. I don't know. But I like the way that was explored in the book, and they didn't really touch on that much in the new movie.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And it was hard, and I'd be curious to know what Hillary thought about this, but I watched the movie together, obviously, with our wives. And as I was driving home with Sally, I asked her, like, what did you think that was about? Because having read the book, I could only see places where it didn't make sense in the movie. I thought things were underexplained, and I felt like it must be entirely incomprehensible to someone who has never read the book. But Sally really liked it. Like, that did not bother her, that some of these motivations weren't explored or explained.
Yeah.
For her, that's what made it accessible. And and to me, I watched it and I'm like, was that a movie?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you. So we're talking about the 2021 movie, not the David Lynch like 80s movie, which I haven't seen. There was the 80s
and
movie.
Which I'm sure is great. It's probably
it does cover the whole book, and it's kind of a cult classic at this point. But this really abruptly stops the new movie. Yeah. So I feel like that's a good be warned about that, because just like the book, it's just like, and the movie's over right here.
Yeah, which was an interesting choice, because I think visually it was a really great movie, and clearly, like, my wife was sucked into it. She will happily watch part 2.
Yeah,
but I just thought it was an interesting choice, because a lot of the movie really they could have condensed into the first 20 minutes to half hour if they wanted to then focus on the other half of the book and fit it all into one movie. So it was a very deliberate choice to stretch out that sort of beginning sequence that long, which is what he does in the book, in the first half of the book.
True.
but not much happens plot-wise.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, and it's all sort of like, well, I think he plays a lot. Frank Herbert does in the original book. I think he plays a lot with like inevitability. I think that's a theme that kind of keeps coming up. That like once Paul kind of gets hip to the fact that like this is the course he's going down, he's like his reluctance is not because he doubts himself or he doesn't think it, but he just like he foresees this bloody jihad and he doesn't want to be a part of that. But it's not that he has doubts. It's just like if we're gonna do this, it's gonna be like pretty bad.
Yeah.
It's so like there's I don't know, you don't really have a sense of like, well, maybe that's not going to happen, or maybe I feel like you're kind of told where things are going really early on, and that's an interesting choice, I think, when you're writing a book like that, to sort of be like, here's where we're going, now read the next 400 pages. And it does work, and I think that's an interesting thing for him to play with, and it kind of sets Paul apart from other sci-fi Messiah type figures, like a Luke Skywalker or something. You just kind of know that Paul's got it and it's going to happen.
Yeah, like you don't know how it's going to happen. He doesn't know how it's going to happen, but everything is pointing to that
it's set in stone. And that's an interesting drive for the book.
Yeah,
I think
the terrible purpose, as he would say.
Yes, I do agree with you on the movie, and my wife liked it the same. I mean, she was like, "How long until the second one's coming out?" Like, she was really in. So I don't know. I guess maybe if you're watching it blind, you just accept that things will be explained as the story unfolds more. I guess I couldn't stop being like, okay, well, here's why that happened, or here's what this character is doing. Like in my head, that's what I was thinking. I was like, okay, I get that. That's not on screen, but I understand what we're talking about. But no, it sounds like they both had a similar experience of just being like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah, they weren't even bothered by their ignorance. They had no idea.
Yeah. What did you think of like the visuals of the movie?
Well, so I do think your TV is wonderful. I think watching it in theaters would have been really cool.
Okay. That feels like a criticism, but okay. Yep, go on.
No, I just because it is so visually overwhelming. They do so much with light. I thought they did a great job with the technology, which we also talked about when we watched it. It felt unique to Dune, which is difficult to do, I think.
Certainly, yeah.
But yeah, no, I thought they did. I thought it was, I enjoyed it. I thought the visuals were good. Do you have thoughts?
I mean, Dune is legendary for being like a sand world with sandworms, and it was very sandy. There was a real like absence of color, which I don't think distracted from it. I guess I was maybe expecting a little bit more like spectacle here and there, but maybe you're right. I mean, maybe that's the trade-off with watching it like at home on HBO Max versus in the theater, because there was no sequence that I found like, oh wow, about it. And I might have in a theater, but I don't really think so. I don't really think that that's what it was going for. So I think it was all really consistent, like the costumes, like you said, the technology and everything, like it's a really cohesive world that you see in that movie. And I think that's cool. And I'm looking forward to the second one.
I think the second one will have more interesting things happen. And I also, I think the Fremen and their culture is the most interesting thing about the book.
Yeah.
And about the movie. And we really don't get into it in this first movie. So I think the second one will be a lot more interesting in that regard. And or at least I hope so.
And the Fremen are the people who already live on the planet and have adapted to living in this like sand world society, and where water is the currency, like water is everything, moisture and bodies and all that. But yes, I agree with you. I feel like that element of it again is really well developed and well thought out, and I think Paul's introduction to that group and the way things progress with those two, I think is it's just pretty compelling, like it really works in a way that, I don't know, it's hard to make that happen, I think. When you're dealing with that inevitability, it's hard not to be like, oh, here we go. But you don't feel that way, They really, like Paul's introduction to the Fremen, I think plays out pretty well in both the book and the movie. Were there certain elements or themes to the book that you gravitated towards more than others?
Well, I think I'm always interested in religion, and I'm also interested in ecology. So those are two like very, very big themes.
Boy.
And so, which I think is part of why I loved it so much. And I, on the religious side of things, I you talked about how Paul is a little bit different than someone like Luke Skywalker or even Anakin, someone like that, because he has this religious fanaticism that follows him, whether he wants it to or not.
Right, exactly.
And I thought that was really, really interesting. And I also loved the elements of, so there's like the Bene Gesserits, which are this order that has existed for centuries.
Sort of a mystical, quasi-religious kind of.
Yeah, exactly. But they've been implanting sort of religious mythologies in different planets all around the galaxy. And that's a way to protect future Bene Gesserits should they find themselves abandoned on a planet, that they'd be able to sort of latch onto these mythologies. But then it's interesting because Paul enters into this culture that has had one of these implanted mythologies. Yeah. And he's like the fulfillment of a prophecy, which you could see as an artificial form of religion because it's been planted. Right. But it's also been integrated and adapted into this culture and this group of people. And Paul is genuinely fulfilling the prophecy, you know?
I mean, you're exactly right.
He's the guy. He's the chosen one. He's the Kwisatz Haderach.
And because it's so layered so deeply for so long in there, you can't separate the two, you know? So, like, whether or not it was artificial in the beginning, it ceases to be artificial, you know? Yeah,
which I think is a really interesting, you know, when we're looking at religion, there's so much, there's always question of like what's authentic and that's not real and this came later, and but it all blends together eventually. And I think Frank Herbert did a really great job of addressing some of those key issues in religion in a way that like Star Wars doesn't. They just don't go there, you know.
I mean, I think the political side of it for me, like especially reading the book, was something that I was really intrigued by, because I mean it's just this big like intergalactic chess game that's happening, you know, where like people are just working on so many levels. And so like the ripple effect, I think little things would happen and there'd be this ripple that would kind of change the whole landscape. And I liked that. I thought that was a cool element of it. And that was something that like I would want to see more of. Like, you know, when I was like halfway through Dune, I was not anticipating that I would want to read Dune Messiah or any of the others. But it did kind of leave me being like, okay, well then here we are. So what now? You know, like I do want to know that. So I mean, I'll go as far as you're going, Sarah. How far are you going in this Dune series?
I'm going to the end.
You're gonna ride this train all the way to. Okay.
No, I'm at least gonna read Children of Dune, which is book number 3. Yes. I would probably read all of the Frank Herbert originals, but I don't know if you get to the end of Paul of Dune and you think it's worth it to read some of his son's Brian's books. I would maybe dip into them. But,
okay.
That feels like a slog to commit to that.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's so many of them. I looked at Paul of Dune as like an extra credit assignment, you know, which I didn't do in college very much, but here we go, you know. So yeah, I mean, I like I said, we're on this track together, sister. So, you know.
Well, I think reading Dune Messiah, is probably worth your time if you enjoyed the world, if you want to read more. It clarified some things. It had some interesting turns for the characters. And like I said, getting to the end of that felt like the first book.
Okay.
Like a coherent.
You're saying book. Like Dune and Dune Messiah together felt like one book?
Yeah. Oh. To me, because you follow him through the whole story.
Right.
And then, you know, obviously more things happen.
Right.
I don't want to spoil it for you, but I do think those two fit together pretty nicely.
Okay. All right. Opinion. I'll do it. I finally got my copies back from you, so I can keep going.
I know. I stole Dune number 1 back, but
yeah.
We'll do it together.
I appreciate a book where like after I'm done reading it, my star rating kind of gradually goes up the more I think about it, and I think that's definitely true of Dune. You know? Because I mean, even though I enjoyed it, like when I got to the end of it, I was glad to be done. You know, I was like, yes, you know. And then
what I was gonna say, it says something about a book to have parts that you really don't like, to not fully enjoy it,
right?
But still,
yep, absolutely. Well, we have the whole collection of Dune books, and we have a lot of we have all the Frank Herberts, and we have a lot of the Brian Herbert, Kevin J. Anderson's one in the collection right in Wellsville, or wherever you are in the Southern Tier library system. You can place a hold on it, and you can get them. But Sarah, 2 thumbs up for you on both the book and the movie?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I didn't know how I was going to feel about the movie. It did kind of make me want to go back and watch the 80s one. Do you think you'd ever do that?
I would absolutely do that.
You would.
We should
You're in. I agree. I absolutely. And I know that there was a mini series with James McAvoy called Children of Dune, which covers Messiah and Children of Dune, the books. So I don't know.
I would also watch that. I mean, again, I'm invested in this world.
Yeah.
I don't know how long I'm going to go, but I can picture myself as an 80-year-old somewhere on a plane or a train going to a doctor's appointment.
Sure. You finish your latest Debbie McCumber and Nicholas Sparks, and you say, "Hey, what's Frank Herbert up to?"
Yeah, what's happening in Dune?
He's dead, but yeah, there's lots of the books. All right, well, Sarah, this has been quite a journey that we've had together, and I look forward to future stops.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts? Did you listen to our Halloween episode that your wife was on?
I did not. I told you I'm bad.
Oh,
I can't listen.
You're married to her. You're married to the Queen of Halloween, and
which means I get to listen to her all the time.
That's true. Know? Good point.
My whole life is a podcast with Sally.
That's a good point. That is a good point. All right. Well, next Halloween, there's 7. There's 7 Halloween episodes now. So
I have so much to catch up on.
Next Halloween, you could do a whole full day's work just listening to the past Halloween episodes.
I'll try for you.
All right. Well, I guess that's gonna Dune it. I'm sorry, everyone. That was. I'm tired. It's been a long day. It's been a long day. All right. Well, thank you to my guest Sarah Jacoby Murphy. She and I will be continuing to read Dune books somewhere. So if you're home alone reading a Dune book, just know that somewhere Sarah and I are to the same moon of Saturn reading a Dune book with you, my friends.
That's right. Always.
So long, Sarah.
Bye, Nick.